Levantaré mi bandera, estando en mi país o estando allá afuera, porque para mí, mira, no existen fronteras. Yo levantaré mi bandera, wow. Levantaré mi bandera, estando en mi país o estando allá afuera, porque para mí, mira, no existen fronteras. No, no, y es que hay mucho sentimiento, lo grito al viento, de ser latino nunca me arrepiento. Lo digo desde la Suiza, centroamericana, rebota en Colombia y en Dominicana y yo.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the 2023 Revolucion 30-day digital festival brought to you by TodoWafi. This is a literature in Latinidad panel, and I'm your moderator, Eduardo Denis. And my guests today are Celia. She's an author and a creator. Davina. She's a CEO of a publishing company. And Yasmín, who is also an author. So we're going to talk to everyone. I got some questions I prepared. I myself, I am an author and an illustrator. I'm a game designer and an animator. So today you can expect some informal, discussion about writing and publishing, but through a colorful lens that maybe you haven't heard this perspective before. So let's just jump right into it. First thing I want to do is I want to start with like a round table. I just want to start, and we'll start with Celia. You can just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where people might know you from.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Celia Martinez. I'm a creator, mostly on TikTok, but lately also on Instagram. And I do poetry, and I was also this year able to self-publish 2 poetry books, Diary of a Romantica Volume 1 and Volume 2. And Diary of a Romantica is also my Instagram handle. So the point of those books was essentially, I felt like it was like a diary of mine with all this poetry in my head, and Diary of a Romantica because I'm a very romantica person. But yeah.
Davina, you want to go next?
Yes, so hi everyone, my name is Davina Ferreira. I am the founder of Alegria Publishing. I'm also a writer and a poet, and the mission of our company is to increase the representation of Latine, Latinx authors, poets, and performers in an industry that, as we know, is highly underrepresented. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. And right before this, I posted on my social media I was going to be doing this, and I had a few of your authors write me, and they're like, "Oh, that's my publisher. She's amazing." So thank you for being here. Yasmín.
Sure, yes. I'm Yasmín Ramírez. I'm the author of the novel Ándale, Prieta. It's a memoir from Lee and Low Books, and I am an author, educator, and I'm just happy to be here with y'all this evening.
Thank you. Yes. I think it's awesome. Just, off the cusp, I'm looking at, we have someone who's self-publishing. We have someone who's represented. I'm assuming, Yasmín, you're represented by an agent because you had to get in contact with Lee and Low. And then Davina is the CEO of a publishing company. So we have a wide variety of voices here today, and I'm very excited. So let's start off with, we're going to start off some deep questions and some surface level ones. I do know people that are watching this are probably thinking, oh, I have some ideas for books, part of our community, and our goal is to help those people. And also, I want to know about everyone here. How did you get into writing and publishing? And we'll do the same thing. We'll start, Celia. How did you get into writing? And for you, why did you go the route of self-publishing?
Yeah, so the way that I got into writing, I never really saw myself as a writer. I've always kind of been a STEM person. I've been a STEManiste. So I studied biology in college. I'm pre-med. So writing was never something that I considered as necessarily a career path until kind of more recently. And the way that I got into it was actually, I fell in love with poetry in high school, and there were some assignments that we had to do writing poetry. And I wrote a couple poems here and there, but I didn't think anything of it until later on when I was a senior in college. And I graduated college in 2021, so it was kind of in the middle of the pandemic. Everything was online, and I was a senior at Yale, so Yale went completely virtual. All of our classes were online, and so I just felt incredibly alone, as so many other people did during the pandemic. And I felt like I needed someone to talk to. I needed someone to listen to me, and I didn't feel heard in many different aspects. So I started writing poetry just in my notes app, and I would write about everything and anything, of heartbreak and feeling alone and I would write in Spanish, I would write in English, I would do Spanglish poems. And then later on, I also began posting those on social media. So first on TikTok, because I was like, nah, nobody's gonna find it, like it's fine. And when you're first starting out with anything, you're like, it's gonna be bad, it's gonna be cringe, like people won't like it. And eventually I started making my poetry more and more vulnerable. So I wrote about being a first-gen low-income college student at an Ivy League and feeling completely alone, and like I didn't really relate to a lot of people. And I wrote that, I posted it, and it was one of my first poems that went viral, and a lot of people really connected to it and said, I really relate to your story, and this is a feeling I haven't been able to put into words. And so because of that, I kind of continued on, and thankfully, and the platforms have grown into what they are now. And in growing, a lot of people are like, we want, your words in our hands. We want to have your books. Like, is this something you've considered before? And at that point, I was only really doing spoken word. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I've never really seen myself as someone that would be an author. Like, and also with that comes a lot of like imposter syndrome of like, who am I to publish a book? Like, who am I to write and to say that I'm a poet and a writer and an author? And I talked to a lot of my family. So both my parents are Mexican immigrants, and they've always been like, échale ganas, mija, like you can do anything you set your mind to. Like, and so I talked with my family, I talked with a lot of my friends, and they were like, Celia, this is something that you could do. Like, you're really stopping yourself here. You're the only person blocking you. Like, if you want to do it, go and do it. And so through that, I started learning about self-publishing. And actually, my brother and we were doing all this research, and my brother went to MIT for business. So he had all these ideas of like, what if we do this? What if we do that? And eventually I was like, okay, this is something that we could do, just the two of us. Let's do it. Like, echarle ganas, as my parents have always told us. And they've always been the type to be like, oh, shoot, for the moon. And if you fall, at least you'll fall among the stars. So I was like, okay, no matter what happens, like, even if I fail terribly, like, at least I did it. And I'll say, I'll tell my future kids someday, like, look, I tried it. So no pasa nada. And through that, I looked more into like Kindle Direct Publishing and publishing through Amazon. And I was able to do that with the help of my family and so many other people. But that was kind of like how I got into writing, why I decided to publish.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, because after we go to Davina and Yasmín, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome and how it's kind of a normal thing as a minority group, as we all are, because we're not used to seeing ourselves in these positions of creativity, authority, or power. So we're gonna wrap back around that. But we're gonna go to Davina, because she's looking at this from a different view as the CEO of a huge publisher, right? Well, I won't say huge. I'll let her describe her publishing.
Yeah, thank you,
But,
though.
yes.
Yeah. Well, it actually started pretty much like Celia, because I self-published my work when I was like in my 20s, before, TikTok and Instagram and all of that, aging myself right here. And what I saw was that, of course, there was like all this system and these, big publishers that obviously it was very hard for us to be represented. Of course, at that moment, I just did my writing because it's been like my passion since I was like a teenager growing up in South America, in Colombia. But at that time, I was like more focused in school and developing what became Alegria magazine and all of that. And it wasn't until the pandemic, which, it's interesting that that also happened to you, where I did a contest online through our platform at Alegria Publishing, and discovered that all these incredible poets and writers from all over the state submitted their work for an anthology. We did like a contest. I was like, oh my God, here I go with like this crazy idea, and nobody's gonna submit anything. And we got over like 170 poems from like incredibly talented Latine poets and writers, and that became our first anthology. And that's really when I started asking myself, like, who is publishing all of this incredible talent? And the answer is that there are many grassroots organizations per se, but as we know, we're all like a small indie grassroots. So we're highly underrepresented by the big five, and, things are slowly changing, but still it doesn't amount to what we truly represent. And that's how it started. So, I've always been self-funded, an independent company. So when you say huge, obviously it's sweet, but like the reality is that it's a labor of love. because, obviously we don't have the same power, the same marketing power than a lot of these companies, but we do a lot of the impact through our own community. And I think that's the beauty of it, that when we come together, I mean, just since 2020 to now, we helped publish over 110 Latine poets and writers, and that's like unheard of, especially because we don't have big investors or anything like that. But that speaks a lot about first having an amazing team, loving what you do, really believing in the mission of what you really love, and also the community, the power of community. I feel like without that, we're definitely nothing. So, yeah, that's a little bit of the journey.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And if you haven't noticed, Davina's at the beach, so I'm getting big CEO vibes from her right now. I love it. Yasmín, you're coming at this from a different point of view. For our viewers at home, Celia has self-published, and she's used the power of social media to kind of harness her book and her sales. Tell us how you got into writing, into publishing, and tell us how that journey was with getting an agent, and then getting a deal. And how did you feel after that?
Sure. Yeah. It was interesting when Celia was talking, because the first part of her story is very similar to mine, in that I didn't feel like I was a writer. I didn't know what a writer looked like or sounded like, but I knew it wasn't like me. You go to the shelves and there's a lot of, Smiths and Jones and all of these anglicized surnames, and I didn't think I belonged there. And certainly not my story. And so my book, Ándale, Prieta, started out as a way to heal and mourn the loss of my grandmother. And really, it was for me initially. But then I ended up going to graduate school. I got an MFA in creative writing. And in that space, I was struggling because my background was not creative writing at all. I was the person who read a lot and doodled a lot in my journal, but I was in this suddenly very academic setting, and it was very difficult. And then I found something interesting. I stumbled into an accident. I submitted something that I'd written about my grandmother, and I got sort of the best response I'd ever gotten before. And it was because it was my authentic, true voice, and I wasn't writing the way I thought a writer should sound. And then from there, my writing process was long, because in between that, I got hired as a tenure track professor, and I was trying to get tenure. And so I would write in spaces. But I actually worked with an editor who introduced me to my press. So I got an agent post-book. So it was kind of interesting. I was non-traditional in that manner, in that an editor sort of connected me with the press, which was Cinco Puntos Press at that point. And then they got bought by Lee and Low Books during the pandemic. And then with the hype of the book and all these things, then I just sort of networking, and I now have an agent, and she's patiently waiting for me to finish my second book. In fact, that's what I was working on right before this. And so I did a traditional route, but I did have a lot of turnabouts and curvy roads along the way.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So yeah, anyone who's listening, watching now or later, you have 3 points of view. That should give you, you shouldn't have to Google too much, because I know when I was doing a book, I had to Google everything. Like, I didn't know what self-publishing was. Celia was mentioning Kindle and all that stuff. So yeah, you can Google all of that, but now you have these 3 points of view. And that's going to wrap me back around to our first topic that we kind of mentioned in Celia's talk, which is imposter syndrome. I know for myself, on Friday, I'm speaking at the Game Devs of Color Expo. Next month, I'll be speaking at UT Austin for Hispanic Heritage Month. And I always get real clammy. My hands get sweaty. I get nervous, because growing up, I didn't see anyone that looked like me doing this stuff. I only saw Caucasian people. So I get nervous because I have imposter syndrome. And I think to myself, like, I'm 5'9", so some little Mexican guy out there doing, books and stuff. It just, sometimes I have to tell myself, like, all right, I got to hold my book and I got to look at it and tell myself, this really happened. I really wrote a book. I deserve this, right? So Celia, expound a little bit more. Talk about that and how you feel holding your book, or even what advice you would give to someone.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about imposter syndrome for years and still not be done, because it's something that I feel like is almost ingrained in our success somehow. Like if you're a successful minority, that comes with having imposter syndrome. And, you know, growing up, I didn't necessarily feel it to the extent I did once I started becoming more quote unquote traditionally successful. So that was like, for example, going to a good school, a quote unquote good school, right? Which was Yale. So then I'm there and you meet all sorts of people there. And that's a big blessing. But it also, with that, you realize that a lot of people don't come from backgrounds like your own. There may be a few, you may meet them, you may be friends with them, but the vast majority will not have the same experiences, the same stories, the same upbringing that you yourself had. And so with that, you kind of put yourself into this mentality of, they say, what is it, like small fish in a very big pond, where suddenly nothing is familiar to you. And if nothing is familiar to you, then everything is strange. And if everything is strange, then you don't belong there somehow in your mind. And so that then turns into the imposter syndrome of, anytime you have any sort of big win, you're like, I don't deserve this. Who am I to deserve something like this? And when that later became writing, I still feel this every single day. Like I when you were saying your hands get clammy, I'm literally sweating right now. I'm like, who am I to be in this panel with everybody that's so cool? And so it's something that I deal with every single day. And I think I'll continue to deal with every single day. And in that, it's also like, it's hard to deal with imposter syndrome, but it also kind of does bring you back to earth in a way, because you're like, okay, like who am I? Who is anybody? Like who is everybody? You know, it kind of like branches out into this thing of, what is the definition of success? Who is successful? And why is traditional success the way that it is today? And so now, as you were saying, like sometimes you literally have to hold your books and be like, I did this, I published this. There are times where I have to look in the mirror and be like, as long as you like what you're doing, as long as you feel that you have impacted yourself in some way, even if nobody else likes what you're doing, even if everybody else hates it, like the one person you have to make proud is yourself at the end of the day. And as long as you're staying authentic and staying true to yourself and doing something that makes you happy at the end of the day, I think that's so important to remember whenever there's any sense of imposter syndrome. Because there's always going to be people that dislike you. There's always going to be people that say you're not meant to be successful. And I've had so many different moments, even when I was just in high school, when I was a teenager, where I was going to this very big public high school, and I came into it in such a way that my brother had just graduated. He had just graduated as one of the first Latino valedictorians of our high school. So I went in, and a lot of people expected that from me. And with that, a lot of people also said, you're never going to be successful. You don't deserve to be successful. And because of the way I was raised, and my parents always instilled in us, like what I was saying before, you can do anything as long as you work really hard at it. I worked incredibly hard, and I would go and tell a counselor, like, I want to take these 5 AP classes, and they'd be like, are you sure you can handle this? And they would only say it to me. They wouldn't say it to other people. They'd be like, are you sure you can do this? This is really hard. And in that moment, that imposter syndrome sets in, and you're like, I'm a teenager. What do I know? Like, I don't think I can do it. But it's almost like a future version of me came back and said, you've already done this. You got this. And so I would be like, yeah, I can do it. I can do it. I can do anything. And so I would say yes. And then later on, I also ended up being one of the first Latina valedictorians of my high school. And so that sense of imposter syndrome, like, it's something that you deal with so heavily, but you almost have to fake it till you make it and have this sense of confidence that you're like, where did this come from? And sometimes like, oh, maybe it's like, es por Dios, es por la Virgencita, tal vez es like por mi familia, right? Like there's so many of my family members that weren't able to pursue educations, that weren't able to accomplish their dreams because they had to leave their country to come here. And so whenever I have imposter syndrome, I'm like, if I have the opportunity to do something, I should pursue it, and I should do it to the best of my ability. As long as I'm doing it authentically and it makes me happy, like, que te valga madre lo que dice la gente, right? That's what I think about that.
I love it. No, thank you. It's interesting because if you go to your social media, which everyone should follow everyone on here, the social media, your social media is amazing. I think you have like 600 some, K plus thousand followers. And you would never think, oh, this person has an imposter syndrome, but it, even as popular or successful and going to Yale, these are things we still suffer with. Davina, coming to you, imposter syndrome as a CEO, is that a real thing? I wouldn't know, but is that a real thing?
Yes, that's interesting because like most of us, we all have such unique stories of how we got here in the first place. So I feel I've always had this feeling that the sacrifices that we've had to make, or our families. In my case, it was I am the only one that came here. You've got to make it worth it. For me, it's always been, I actually have a poem related to that where it's like, you just got to make it worth it because we sacrifice so much. We leave countries of origin, family, loved ones, so many things that we miss, right? When we take this decision for go all out and believe in ourselves and our dreams. And, for me, it's like, I haven't even, for me, it's in a way very hard to explain how and why I had this ability to believe in myself so much. But I think it comes from that like if I knew I had to sacrifice and go through so much, I had to make it worth it, right? And I had to make it meaningful. And yeah, like I do suffer from it, of course, but at the same time, it's become very clear to me that there's so many things in the art and media and publishing that we just are not there yet, right? And I couldn't find them for myself. So I was like, I don't know how, but I'm just gonna have to create it myself, right? And I feel like that is something that became very clear to me very early on, that there were not people that were going to be like, hey, I discover you, or, someone that was going to bring these creative opportunities to me, and that I just had to work extremely hard to create something that would allow me to not only express and have this opportunity to share my art with the world, but also open and pave the way for younger artists like maybe I was. And I was like, oh, I wish, when I was 17 and I first came to the US, I wish I had that. I wish we had other ways to publish and be able to share our art and all that we have right now, which I think we have a lot more resources and we have social media and all of that. So for me, even though, of course, we doubt ourselves, for me, it's just like I just try to be super focused and know that I've chosen this path to like just create opportunities for myself, and therefore now I can offer those opportunities to others. So
I love that. Yes, you put yourself in that, I guess, that driver's seat to help everyone out. And that's very scary because you have that pressure on you. You feel like you came here and this is something that you have to do and you're doing it. That's awesome. Yasmín, how do you deal with imposter syndrome, especially being in the position you are of a professor, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm an associate professor. So you're gonna maybe laugh or find this weird, but I don't like to use the term imposter syndrome. I actually, and this is the educator in me, so please forgive me. I'm gonna have like my little box out right now. But I was actually reading, and imposter syndrome was actually a theory that was created by white theorists about people of color. And so when I was reading more about it, I was like, wait a minute. So they just labeled essentially when we're being undermined, right? I couldn't help but thinking about that when Celia was talking, where she went and her counselor's like, are you sure you can handle this? And she's the only one being asked that question. And that's sort of undermining our authority and our confidence in ourselves. And I feel like we're constantly undermined. It's not that we suffer from imposter syndrome. It's that we're being put in positions where we have to question our confidence. And I don't know if other people suffer from that. Or I want to say, I think we know that other people don't suffer from that. Only people of color come from this place of reflection of, am I right? Right? We question ourselves. Am I doing this the way I should be doing this? And mostly it's from lack of resources and being undermined. So I try not to use that. I'm sorry, I'll put my little box away. I think it all comes down to being marginalized and not giving the resources that other classmates or other colleagues are given. I'm really lucky in the fact that I live in a place that's 85% Latino. So I don't feel a lot of the marginalization that happens in other places. I have felt it. I travel outside of El Paso very often. So as soon as I travel outside of El Paso, I feel like I put on this little like Iron Man armor in preparation for what's coming my way, especially like presenting at conferences or traveling. I often travel with my husband, who is also Colombian. He's from Medellin. He has an accent. He's more morenito than me. So when we're out and we're talking with each other, I'm like, I feel like I'm like, right? Like paying attention. And one thing that I've done is try to focus on how I use my language and how I use not only my little box as an educator, but also my little box as an author. And so my book, Ándale, Prieta, could not be any more like Latino. The title, right, is in Spanish, which is a pretty big deal because the book is mostly in English. And so in that, I felt like there's little pushes that I've given and that I've been allowed or that I pushed against the grain for myself, right? The title, the font, the use of Spanish that was not italicized anymore. The fact that I have heavy dialogue in Spanish, but I give context in English. And that was like little nudges. And I'm grateful that I had a supportive publisher that said, okay, you can have the Spanish, do it, but have some spaces in there for non-Spanish speakers. And it was this constant middle ground that we were finding, which I appreciated, right? I'm very blessed because I've heard horror stories. And so I want to continue to do that in future books. I want to continue to have this representation. And now that I have not lots of followers, but I do have followers on social media and I'm posting and people are reaching out to me because of the book and sharing their experience. And you know, one of the prettiest experiences, I think, was people saying they felt seen because the word Prieta was on the cover, that's in the title, and that I celebrated the word instead of villainizing it, right, or weaponizing it. So really, I think I'm just trying to use my power for good, the little boxes that I have in my life, and trying to empower those around me, and like maybe bringing to attention little word choices, right, because it helps us saying I'm marginalized, not a minority. I don't have imposter syndrome. I'm being, I just lost the word as I wanted to say it. I'm being undermined, right? Things like that I feel also have helped my psychology and my belief in myself if I edit those words out. And those are words that seek to belittle me and not help me grow.
I love that. Yeah. And you know what? I had no idea. I learned something today and I kind of want to research it now. What you said about the white theorist creating that term of imposter syndrome. Because it really does show that they, you know, I don't want to say they or them or anything, but you know, we are a lot of times our communities put in a box and it's lower than other communities and it's not fair. And we are, you know, all of you guys and I and everyone else who chooses to write a book, we're taking our power back really to tell our stories. So that goes into my next question. What does everyone here think the biggest issue is, or issues, if you want to expound on it, facing our community when it comes to publishing and storytelling? Celia, we'll start with you.
That's a hard question. That's a hard question.
It's a loaded question, I know.
It's a loaded question. So where to even start? I mean, one is definitely knowledge of resources, which is not only a problem in publishing, but a problem in so many other aspects, like healthcare, for example. People don't get the services that they need because they don't know that they exist. So if you find someone, and especially say they're like a young Latine, like teenager that is considering being a writer and author, they might not know that so many of these resources exist if they want to self-publish. And also another one of the problems I think is oftentimes we could tell our stories, and as Yasmín was saying, like they could be undermined, where somebody might be like, no, your feelings aren't valid. And I've experienced this a lot because the curse that comes with doing things so publicly on social media and doing spoken word that I've seen is oftentimes you could put something and get instant feedback, and people will love it, and so many people will also hate it, and they'll be like, no, you shouldn't feel this way. And you're like, but I do feel this way. This is my story. This is what I put into words. This is a feeling that I'm sure other people do have, because you see it kind of happen. And so one of those problems is when that happens, when your own story starts to be undermined, you start to second guess yourself. You start to be like, no, I shouldn't talk about this. No, I shouldn't post anything. No, I shouldn't write. I shouldn't, and that undermining then affects not only that one person, but other people kind of see their reaction to, oh no, this person said this and they, got hate. So I don't want to do it anymore because I'm afraid. And there's a big sense of courage that comes with doing anything, but especially putting your story into something that will be shared so publicly. And that's why, like I said, my books are called Diario Romantica. I was like, a lot of these stories are incredibly personal and vulnerable to me. I'm like, do I really want to share this? Like, do I actually think this would be a good idea? Because you're also setting yourself up for the potential of, if somebody hates it, they don't hate some character that exists in some fictional space necessarily. They hate who you are. And that's tough. That's really tough because, I personally grew up being incredibly severely bullied. And so that affected my psyche and my sense of worth so deeply that it's taken me years to come back from it. And anytime, it got so bad to the point where, like, I would hear people laughing and automatically assume they were laughing at me. Or I would hear people whispering and automatically assume they were like talking bad about me. And writing my books was sort of like reclaiming my voice and being like, this is how I feel. I don't care what anybody else thinks of it, because even if it's just one person, one, young Latina out there that reads my book, my story, my poems, and if she laughs, if she cries with them, if she feels connected to them, I'm like, that's worth it. That's worth it, because it's also something that I desperately needed when I was a teenager, when so many people in the media space didn't look like us. And so I grew up hating my hair. I wanted to always straighten my hair. And I was like, no, I hate like having wavy curly. I was like, why? Even though I saw my family have the same hair type as me, I was like, no, because what's considered traditionally pretty doesn't look like us. And so I write a lot about that. And I made my poetry be bilingual as well. And, as Yasmín was saying, how you have like some stuff in Spanish, some stuff in English. My books are primarily in English, but now more recently on social, I've been doing poems completely in Spanish, because Spanish is my first language. Like, I grew up speaking Spanish at home. My parents made it a rule, like, you could only speak Spanish at home. And what actually ended up happening is I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. And one of my brothers, when he started going to school, we were born in California. He started going to school and they were speaking English. And he was like, you know what? I don't want to speak Spanish anymore. I'm done with this. I don't want to do it. So he went back, told my parents, I'm no longer speaking any Spanish at all. Not at home. I'm done with it. Like, I don't care. My parents, actually, I love them so much. What they did, they're like, okay, well, what's going to happen now? Our entire family is going to move to Mexico. So you don't have a choice. Now you have to speak Spanish, because you said they don't speak Spanish at school. Okay, well, now they're going to speak Spanish at school. And so I actually was born and spent my entire first year of life in Mexico. And so Spanish was my first language. And then I came back. And so I'm able to speak both so fluently, because in a sense, I learned them both at the same time. But I always feel very strong connecting to Spanish. So that was a tangent. But I think one of the big problems, as I was saying, is so often our stories are made to feel not real somehow, and they're undermined to the point where people feel weird sharing them. And also the lack of resources, even if you do decide to share them, where do you start? And so I'm glad that things like this exist, where now, people could see this and be like, oh, actually, now I should contact this person, or now I know about Kindle Direct Publishing and all these different things. So I'm really glad that this exists and that we all get to sit here and talk about our stories.
Awesome. Yes, I totally relate to everything you just said. I know when I was going through the publishing process, I wrote an agent, and the agent told me that they would publish my book if I change Mexico from a real place into a fictional place, and I changed my character from a Mexican boy to an animal. And in children's books, there was over 4,000, roughly a little bit over 4,000 children's books published last year, and only a couple hundred of those were for our community. There's more about monster trucks and animals. So it would make sense why that person would say that. But this was before I knew that there was, a wide variety of agents out there. I was just writing anyone hoping to get a deal. So thank you for your insight, because we are very glad that you're doing what you're doing, and you're absolutely right. Our stories need to be put out there, and there's just not enough of them. Yasmín, same with you. What do you think is the biggest, I guess, issue in our culture when it comes to storytelling and publishing?
I think there's a couple things. So the obvious first one is representation. In that if we don't see ourselves represented, then a lot of times we don't think we can do that, right? That's my case. I thought I had to write about certain things to be an author. There's this wonderful TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie, who talks about the danger of a single story. And she's also a wonderful author. And she was, she grew up in Nigeria, and she's writing about snow and ginger beer, and she's never seen either of them or had either of them. And I had this very same experience where I thought I had to write about, like New York City and or living in LA or places at that point I had never been. And so there's that. The second thing I think is sort of this confidence in ourselves. From being undermined for so long, we don't find our stories valid, right? We just think that they're boring, or no one's going to understand them, or no one's going to relate to them. And while it's a beautiful thing to write for ourselves, I think writers pour their hearts into something so that someone else can connect, right? And so there's that. And then I think the third thing is, a lot of times, like, we just don't know. We're not given the resources on what to do or where to go. And, our families don't know either. They're kind of like, luckily my family was very supportive, and they're like, okay, you want to get a master's in creative writing, go do it. Okay, now what? And then I was like, oh yeah, good question. Now what? And so, but they never told me don't do it, right? But I know, again, I was very lucky. I have friends who their parents are like, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor, you have to go in this career where you're going to make money, and money is equated with success, of course. Not that we don't all want money, we do, but some of us would like to be happy while doing it, right? And luckily, I am an educator, and I love doing that. Now, I'm a writer, I love doing this. Am I the richest person in the world? No, but I'm here on a Sunday night in this very cool panel, talking about these topics. So I would say that I am very rich, I am very blessed. And so if I had to say something to my community, I would say to trust in our stories, to celebrate our stories, and that, it goes back to echándole ganas. You just find the way, and sometimes you go the wrong way and you loop around, and no one ever, like, you're not going to get anywhere unless you try, unless you pull the seat out at the table, unless you demand it. And if you get no, then you do it again and you go somewhere else. But you have to keep trying. And I think that's where it comes into play, and sort of being terca, like, I'm doing this because I know I am where I am, because I was very terca, and sometimes in very awkward ways, but I was just trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we are a resilient people. The whole range of us. We come in different size and shapes and colors, and we never give up. And I think that's one of our best qualities as a community. So thank you for sharing your insight. Davina, you have a very different insight than Celia and Yasmín. The question to you is a little different, but it's the same, really. What do you think the biggest issue with our community and our culture is when it comes to publishing?
Yes, I share your point of view, with Celia and also Yasmín. I also seen it from, like, the business, the industry, this standpoint. I feel that, quite honestly, it's a numbers game, and is the lack of resources and support that we have, because you guys know, I'm sure, and a lot of people, I love to bring this up to, like, emerging authors in our community, that it is a numbers game. Like, some of these, like, white authors that get published by one of these top publishing companies, they have a lot of marketing dollars, right? So of course, like these memoirs, they picked, and some of them have $500,000 in marketing funds, right? What does that mean? So that means you get a lot of press. There are several things you can do with that. You appear in all the big lists, and even a lot of like the best-selling list, believe it or not, it also has to do with that. And it's sad in a way, but like if there is, I'm sure we all have seen people that are like, oh, I'm a best-selling author, and there is like all these tricks, you can, if you have the funds, you can actually buy a certain number of these copies, right? And that will make you a bestseller, right? So there's a lot of these fake funny things, and I feel that once we also are very aware of that, it's like we stop thinking that our work, there is something wrong with our work, and it is nothing wrong with our work. And quite honestly, some of the poets, like emerging poets that we have, like they are so incredibly talented that are better than a lot of the things I actually see commercially published. And I'm like, it and it is a numbers game. So don't believe, keep creating. I love telling young writers and poets and artists in general, create. If this is what you love, no matter how you do it, self-publishing, there's so many avenues nowadays, social media, um create. Don't let all this BS stop you from sharing your art, from learning from the process. Your first book maybe is not the best one, but you keep doing it, you keep improving, you keep fine-tuning yourself, you keep going to workshops, you keep studying and refining your craft, and that is the most important thing. Just know the publishing companies are a business. There is a lot of commercial elements to it, and it is just that, quite honestly, so there's nothing wrong with our stories. We have incredible talent all over, from all our different countries, that make our culture. And yeah, keep creating, because it has a lot to do with that, with the resources and how it is. So we have to create our own opportunities, keep investing in ourselves, in our own communities, and just keep working hard, and don't let the world and the noise kind of silence us like they always have, and it is up to us to stop doubting ourselves so much, thinking that we're not deserving of these spaces, because we are, and it is just comes down to the money, and that cannot define us and our worth as artists.
Thank you. Yes, we are very lucky to have Davina here, because her insight into the numbers and the business aspect is very different than Celia and Yasmín's creative outlook. Because at the end of the day, publishers do look at these stories, and I know as a children's book author, I have to compete with, I don't know, Captain Underpants, right? I think that's the name of it, and it's, to me, that's great, but there's no culture in that. It's just bland. It's a story. It's great. It's not something you see on the news, right? You look on TV, you see immigration. So I think our stories are very relevant. Our culture is growing so much in the United States. It's always been here, obviously, right? The border crossed us, but Davina's right, our culture is, our people are so creative. Look all over South America. We have like the coolest pyramids ever. I'm biased, don't quote me on that, but our artwork's amazing. Our food is again, I'm biased, but the best. So that brings me to our next question is, how does your culture, Celia, how does your culture influence your work? If someone's going to read, I don't know, enter a name of a Caucasian poet, what are they going to take away from yours? What's going to be different?
Before I answer that, I want to get back to the point of bringing out a seat at the table. I heard this quote that says, if nobody offers you a seat at the table, you sit on the table. And I wanted to say that for anyone listening. I think that's very important, to kind of like ser terca and like put your foot down. But something that I try to convey whenever I'm writing, whenever I'm sharing something in such a public space, I really try to think about, okay, what message are other people going to get from this? Because with anything, people can interpret something a completely different way than how you wrote it. And so I always try to be very conscious of, okay, I want to share something in such a way that will hopefully make this space a more positive, a safer space for people that look like us, that come from our communities, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel able to express themselves in whatever way they may choose. It might not be writing, it might not be poetry, but to allow them to really create a space within themselves and within whatever spaces that they're in to be themselves, because that's so hard to do nowadays. And so whenever I'm writing, one of the things that I try to do, and sometimes I will literally call my parents and talk to my parents and be like, hey, I have this poem in Spanish, I have this poem in Spanglish that I really want to write, and I really want to convey this message of, I write a lot about home and about like feeling at home, and I write a lot about love. I'm a very, like I said, romantica person, so a lot of my poems are love poems. And so I try to convey things by using phrases that I grew up with, that my parents have told to me, that are very prominent in Mexican culture. And so, like, I'll talk a lot about like serenatas. And for example, my parents, they both grew up in the same kind of town in Mexico. And so they grew up with people bringing serenatas. They grew up with cartas de amor and all these things. And so I try to include those things in my poetry. Like I'll talk about like, oh, una taza en la plaza. Like I'll try to make rhymes in such a way that whoever is reading will have the imagery of, okay, you're walking around my parents' hometown, and what I also consider my hometown in Mexico, and you're walking around, you're smelling the food, you're listening to the music, and you're really feeling this sense of, I'm also at home. And I've had people that have gotten back to me and been like, oh, you know, I might not be Mexican, but I feel incredibly seen by this poem, because you are so authentically yourself and you show up in such a way that allows other people to also be themselves. And that is what I try my very, very hardest. And even in the first part of my book, when I'm talking about like who I'm thinking, I made sure to put it both in Spanish and in English, because I said I would not be able to do this with a community without the community that I'm from. And I feel so lucky to have kind of grown up in this Latine bubble, because my parents, like I said, they made it so that home was our safe space to show up authentically as ourselves and to speak Spanish. And we were always eating Mexican food. And to this day, it's my favorite food. I'm also biased. I think Mexican food is pretty good, but I think all like the Latino foods are so good. And because of that, I think I feel so lucky to have been able to kind of rewire my brain to be Spanglish, to now be able to share these stories in English, but also have that sazon that, you know, only we are able to have because there are our stories. And so that's why I think it's really important for more, you know, Latino, Latina, Latine creators to share their stories, because nobody else can do it. Like if it's your authentic voice. And so that's why I try to write a lot in like, you know, Spanglish, and to do bilingual poetry. And like I said, hopefully someday I'll release just a book only in Spanish, because lately I've been really liking writing in Spanish. But, yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much. I love how you said that people have read your work and they feel like, for lack of better words, they feel like they're Mexican, even though they're not, right? I mean, that's funny, right? They said they feel like they're seen and heard through it. So our culture does that. I mean, there's a reason why Mexican food is so popular in the United States and abroad. It's popular in other places. Latin American food, South American food. It's just, the ingredients and our stories and our places, our homes in Mexico or South America, anywhere. Yeah, we bring that to the masses, and they like that stuff. So it's interesting. Yasmín, same question to you. Our culture, your culture, what do you do when you write, and how do you put it in there, and how does it kind of mold what you do?
It's interesting because my process is a little bit different in that I don't think about audience at all. I can't. If I think about the audience, then I feel like I'm trying to address a bunch of different people, and that's hard, and it's not who I'm going to be on the page. And so whenever I'm writing, I try to write about things that are close to my heart, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, there's always a grain of truth in everything, right? And so I'm writing for, if I would have to say, I'm writing for myself, but like my younger self, because I know I struggled with trying to find my spot, right? Even though I grew up on the border, my family has been here quite some time. I don't have any connections to Mexico at all. And I don't have family in Mexico. And it was a little bit awkward for me. English was my first language. My Spanish is very pocha. Like I can talk about like food and music pretty well. And if we stray from there, then you'll just start to hear like all of my fumbling. And I grew up in this weird, very interesting spot that many Mexican American people do, and that I was never Mexican enough and I was never American enough, right? There's that dichotomy that we're constantly facing. And so a lot of times when I would read brown literature, I was stuck because it was like first gen stories or immigration stories, and I didn't relate to them. And I was just like, where do I fit here, right? And so I've been trying to write to that. Like I am very proud of my culture. I'm very Latina. I'm Mexican American. I love tacos. I love enchiladas. I love Vicente Fernandez. Like all of these things. I have the link. It's a strong link because of where my family decided to stay. But I also will miss subtleties in Spanish, and I didn't grow up watching El Chavo del Ocho, and I didn't, there's certain things I just didn't get. And I'm writing about that because there's a lot of people like me who are still have these strong links to their culture, but maybe not like fully, like going to visit. I want to know, I wish I knew what that felt like going to visit family in Mexico. And I don't know. I think that's something beautiful that I have like absent limb syndrome, and that I wish I knew, but I don't. And so I've been trying to highlight those things. And just topics that are close to my heart, like colorism is very important to me because it's, I don't have this link, but I'm very prietita, and it's very obviously, I'm not white passing by any means. And so I talk about things like that I've experienced, and my fumbles with language and saying the wrong thing. And I don't know, I had some videos I was doing for a while of just where I was trying to practice my Spanish, and I would say silly things. Like I would try to directly translate. I was trying to say something was cheesy, and then my husband looked at me like I was crazy because I was like, it's quesudo. And he's like, no, Yasmín, not that doesn't work. But I'm trying to laugh in those moments instead of feeling self-conscious and pulling away. And I'm leaning into it in my writing.
I love this. I relate to you as well. I spoke Spanish very well, fluently, up until we moved out of my old neighborhood because it got very bad. We moved to a Caucasian neighborhood, and I completely stopped speaking Spanish. I even at times didn't like my culture or my food. I would go home and try to. I'm pretty dark. I would go and try to wash my skin to make it lighter, just because kids would make fun of me. They'd make fun of my hair. I remember when I was 13, I started getting a mustache. I can grow a huge mustache, like typical Mexican mustache. So, I know what that's like. And part of me writing my book was to reclaim my family's story and my own story. So I relate to you on that. Davina, as the founder and the CEO of a publishing company, I guess this would be like an easy and a hard one for you to answer. How do you put culture first? And I obviously, I know you're not going to be signing a lot of Caucasian poets, right? That's an easy one. But what do you do when you're marketing, I guess, and you're signing people on, and then you're kind of pushing stories out?
Yeah, something that it's become very apparent to me through like my whole journey with Alegria, which started as a magazine 12 years ago, is that the beauty of it, even when I thought about the word alegría, which as we know means joy in English, was that when we come here to the US, or, if we're first generation, or the people that grew up here and their parents or their grandparents came to the US, the beauty of it is that I feel that here, those distinctions of, even though we come from different countries, like El Salvador, there's a lot of Central American immigrants here in Los Angeles, Guatemalans, Mexican Americans, the beauty of it, what I learned coming here, and Colombia, my parents are Colombian from Medellin too, Yasmín. So that's my heritage and this strong accent that never goes away, and I'm very proud of. And it's like here even if we come from all these different countries, we become one as people, without erasing all the beauty and uniqueness of each of our cultures. So, with that being said, Alegria, it's all about celebrating, all of this Latin A experience and all of our stories. And I think the beauty of it is that here we become one in that way because we go through so much of similar experiences, right? And we have to navigate very similar challenges. And I think that here we raise those lines a little bit, right? Like here is like not only the Mexicanos with the Mexicanos or the Salvadorians with the Salvadorians, even though you do find those neighborhoods that celebrate very specific cultures. But I feel as people, especially as Latina and Latinx in the US, I feel like we're all one, and for me that is the celebration of whoever is part of Alegria. We have poets from Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, um Afro Salvadorians, because as Yasmín was saying, we are like already highly underrepresented. What's very evident as well is that Afro Latinos, Afro Latinas, they even represent a lower number of anything and everything that's published, and also the indigenous Latinos, right? So, or Latinas, Latine. So, culture is everything. It's at the forefront, and that is the celebration that that for us is like, how can we make people really know about us and the beauty, not what we see in the headlines and the news and the terrible things and the stereotypes, but celebrate the beauty of our culture.
Amazing. Thank you again for being here. To have your voice here is amazing. I've never seen a panel with the CEO or the board of directors for Penguin Random House or any of them. So it's awesome that you would come here and kind of break it down for our community, why you're doing this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. One last question before we go, because it looks like we have a few more minutes. So just a quick a sentence or two. Celia, starting with you, what advice would you give to anyone who is, in that stage of, I think I want to write something, I don't know what to do, I'm nervous, maybe they feel like they're not supposed to be doing it, I don't know, what would you say to them?
I think if you feel like you want to do it, you should do it. And I think it comes to a point where you have to just sit down and write and remind yourself that if other people can do it, why can't you?
I love it. Perfect. Yasmín, what would you say?
I think finding community is really important. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have a community of people around me. Luckily, El Paso is very rich with published authors. And so I'm blessed to call some of them my friends, and they would give me advice. So community is, I think, vital to where we're going.
Excellent. And Davina, again, a little bit different for you. What would you say to anyone who is looking to maybe contact your publishing house, or maybe someone who is going to contact another publisher or an agent? What advice would you give them?
Yes, not to limit themselves and get discouraged. Once again, there's so many opportunities and ways to share your art nowadays. Definitely, I feel like choose what's best for you, depending on what point in your life and your creative journey you are, self-publishing, I still think it's a beautiful thing. Using your platforms and growing your audience and, finding that community, it's all part of it. I think that is very unique to what you want. If you're a new emerging artist, I feel like self-publishing is great. There is a lot of creative freedom and a lot of things that you don't get when maybe you go and become traditionally published, which quite honestly is very challenging, as we know. So don't limit yourself by these rejection letters or any of that, and put your work out there at every and any possible level that you can. And for me, that's the most important thing. Find a way. There's definitely ways to do it now. Some of them are actually free or close to it. And just create and just know that your story matters, your art matters, and don't let anybody, any Asian publishing company tell you otherwise.
Awesome. Yes. Okay, Davina, before we go, where can people find you at or your company at?
Yes. On Instagram, we're actually pretty active there at Alegria Publishing. And then my personal one on IG as well is Davi F Alegria. That's DAV as in Victor I Alegria.
Awesome. Yasmín?
Pretty much on every platform. I'm Yasmín Ramírez Writes, or you can just go to my website and I have links there, which is yasminramirez.com.
Thank you. Celia?
Yeah, for me, you can find me on Instagram at Diary Romantica, as shown on the screen, or on TikTok at Powerhouse of the Cell with one L, like the mitochondria.
Thank you. And for me, I have my my name right there. You can just put that on Instagram. So yeah, that's it for time. Thank you everyone for your insight. This was beautiful. It was amazing. And I know for myself, I'm inspired. I hope whoever's watching this out there is going to start their publication journey, whether it's self or it's going to be with an agent like Yasmín, or maybe they're going to contact Alegria. I don't know, whatever, right? We're here doing this for them. And yeah, this has been a lot of fun. So thank you for joining us for our Revolucion Literature in Latinidad panel. I don't know why I was so nervous because you guys have been so easy to talk to. Oh my gosh, Davina was at the beach. This has been awesome. I hope they invite me back next year. If you want a complete schedule of events, go to all the social media platforms, TodoWafi, and yeah, that was it. So thanks everyone.
Desde Nicaragua hasta Costa Rica, con esta canción todo mundo se identifica. Llamen a los chilenos y a los cubanos, llamen a Puerto Rico y a los mexicanos, que ya se armó la rumba. Desde Panamá hasta Ecuador, vámonos a Perú y luego hasta Salvador. Que se escuche Brasil y Argentina. Yo quiero un grito de mi gente latina y levantaré mi bandera, estando en mi país o estando allá afuera, porque para mí, mira, no existen fronteras.